Just as a reminder, you can visit us at thepandapod.com. That's thepandapod.com to grab our RSS feed, listen directly, and share PandaPod with your family and friends. You can also reach us directly via email through podcast at thepandapod.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, welcome to the new episode of the Panda Pod. As normal, I am here with Rab
Hey there.
and Jeff.
Hello.
And today we have a special bonus friend, John D. Kennedy. This episode we're going to talk a little bit about role-playing games and other types of games that we enjoy. And so, John, if you could just give a little introduction for yourself, let everybody know what you're about, and we'll get going.
Yeah, so I'm John D. Kennedy. I've been working in the gaming industry for over 20 years, about as long as I've known Wiggy and Jeff. And I've worked on a lot of projects such as Power Rangers, the role-playing game, My Little Pony, the role-playing game, Star Trek Adventures, and The World of Darkness.
That's awesome. So, what's the most recent thing that you've worked on?
Most recently, and if I can get the title right, is Power Rangers: A Jump Through Time, and it is our source book for all things time travel and the in the Power Rangers universe. And it was actually the first project I worked on with Renegade, and one of my first projects working on with Power Rangers, which I was that kid who loved Power Rangers and secretly loved them, even going through high school.
Oh my god, I loved Power Rangers. I remember in probably 5th grade, I went to a county fair and they had like toss a ping pong ball into a fishbowl kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I landed mine and I picked a little like framed portrait of the Green Ranger. That's what I picked.
I remember as a kid, I don't know why I felt so proud about this, but I spent my birthday money buying a Japanese version of the White Ranger and the Tiger Zord. And I didn't know it at the time because it looked weird. I thought it was going to be the next season, but it was the Sentai stuff, the Super Sentai stuff. So when it premiered on the American show, I was a little confused because the White Ranger looked completely different. But I still love the fact that I had, this, and it was cheap and flimsy, but to this day, the White Tiger Zord is still one of my favorites.
Yeah, green and white were my favorites. I mean, I think most guys probably had them as their favorites once green came out, right? Like Tommy was essentially the most popular, I think. And that also includes me. I definitely was a giant fan of Power Rangers. When I was in elementary school, like everybody's playing Power Rangers. Got a group of friends, and in my school, I was the only white kid, and I was also fat, and I also had glasses, and so I was always Blue Ranger. So I didn't like it at first, but then I took it on as a special cause, and leaned into the role a little bit.
He got cooler as we got older.
Yeah, because you realize he was the only one paying attention to anything.
Yeah, I think he literally defeats a bad guy by unplugging it.
Yeah. So what was your role? Was it is it writing? Were you part of like any of the product line work?
At Renegade, or at least this book, I was co-writer with Brian Steele, which we split at 50-50. And pretty much Brian just said, hey, you're really good at writing about weird timelines that don't actually exist. So that's your thing. And I'm like, I don't know if I should feel insulted, but actually I really love this. I was saying I'm the best fake historian on the market.
I think I'd agree. I think I'd agree with that.
So do you play any Paradox like strategy games at all? I feel like that's good fake history.
It is. Oh man, I used to play Eve back in the day with my spreadsheets and everything. Because that's what you do. You give yourself a job after school, not a job that makes
Yep.
money, but a job you do regardless.
No, just good job not making it World of Warcraft. All right.
I mean, that's what we're doing now at almost 40, right? Like that's what we're doing here. So that definitely tracks. Um, anything else that you've been working on recently?
Oh yeah. At Gen Con, we dropped Star Trek Lower Decks, the role playing game, and everyone loved it, which was so good because the problem with writing comedy is that if you there's bad jokes, there's good jokes, but what we don't really talk about is the mediocre jokes, and that's the most painful. Because if I told you guys a pun right now, you might groan, you might laugh. If I just write bad comedy, it's painful. And thankfully, we had an amazing team, and it turned out really well. It really beat my expectations, and we sold out at Gen Con, so clearly people loved it.
Is that based on the cartoon?
Yeah,
Oh, that's fantastic. Is that like a license type deal, or did they tap the company, or?
both, because Modiphius has the license for Star Trek, but we also got to talk to the showrunners, and man, they told us so much like amazing things about the show that didn't even occur to us. Do any of you watch it?
I haven't picked that one up yet, although it's on my list. It's something I do want to check out.
Yeah, me either. I haven't picked it up yet, but I do keep seeing it, so I will eventually get to it for sure.
It's a blast. Like when it came out, we all thought it was going to be really mean and just make fun of Star Trek fans and Star Trek in general. But it's like it makes fun of it in a really positive way. Like you laugh at the dumbest jokes while watching the show, and it was just like the moment that I heard about it, I pushed for us to make the book. And again, Modiphius, I wouldn't say was hesitant, but the Jim Johnson who manages the brand goes, no, I think this will be a good idea, but we got to do this right, or else this will be the worst book we've ever made. And we got a whole lot of really funny and creative people to help make it, and that's the key. Because I could probably write 10 minutes worth of good jokes, but after that, you've got to hand it off to the next person. Otherwise, the book would be pretty painful, as already said. But it was so much fun. Like, you always work with the weirdest people on property. It's like I can't say that I've ever worked with the main actors, but I get to work with the guy who approves scripts. And the best thing that we were told was when you guys watch the show, you'll definitely notice this. The main character, Mariner, is never mean on purpose. They're thoughtless and they're rude sometimes, but they're never mean on purpose. So any jokes that she tells, that's her guiding thing, where she's not like trying to be an asshole. She's just, hey, I think I can do this better than you. Let's see if I am.
I mean, that would track with most people who would play a Star Wars RPG, right? Because we all think we could do better with hindsight, right? Like we all think we could make a better decision. So I can see how that tracks, with the audience. What's your favorite part about working on that IP?
I don't know. I can say it's really, really cool seeing people like come up and ask you to sign their books, but I've got kind of like I don't know, it's kind of a sillier reason, but it's one that it's really helped me with my mom. Like, for the audience at home, I grew up with Wiggy and Jeff, so they've met my mom several times.
Yeah.
And my mom was a geek, and when she would get off work, she'd want to watch, Star Trek, Star Wars, all that. And my mom has always supported me being a writer, but my mom, she'll buy any book that I release, but I wouldn't say that she's read them. Even on her bookshelf at home, I've had several books like Stargate that are still shrink wrapped. But the Star Trek books were the first books that my mom actually started reading, and she would actually have me go through and dog ear pages of where I contributed or where I had oversight. And it's just been really nice having my mom be able to read something and she gets it, rather than, oh, you wrote a book about Half Naked Ninja. You seem to write a lot of those.
I have some questions as somebody who doesn't really know a lot about the industry. So do you does your company have some kind of, or the company that you developed the Star Trek game with, does that have some kind of affiliation with the company that owns the property?
Oh yeah. So Modifius Entertainment's one of the companies I work with extensively, and Chris Birch runs the company. He is just really good at sourcing out contacts and developing these, long-term deals. Because
Okay.
sometimes you see a book hit the market and then the book disappears after a certain point, and it's like, oh, what was up with that? And then it gets up in like a half-price book, rubbish bin. But Star Trek was just one of those things where I could say I was there when Chris got the news. I was visiting him in London, and we were playing a board game, and the next thing I know, he's dancing through his living room, completely unannounced. Just got up, starts dancing. It's me, his wife, and one of his friends just staring across the room as this guy's just literally almost doing like the Chumbawamba dance as he's going through his living room. We're like, what are you doing? What are you high? What's going on? And he just shows us the email where Paramount, which has managed Star Trek for like the last, I forget how many years, accepted their licensing agreement. And then that was history. That was when did I almost die? 2016.
Whoa, we got to revisit that one. Hold on
Yeah,
a
for
second.
sure.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
I do want to say just real quick though. I was one of the. I think you guys did a Kickstarter for the Star Trek Adventures book. Is that right?
Oh, I don't remember. I don't think we did. Although we did for Stargate. Did we do it for
Okay.
Stargate? We might have.
I don't remember. It might not have been a Kickstarter. It may have just been a pre-order. But when I saw that book, I picked it up immediately. And unfortunately, it's really hard to get my group to play anything but like fantasy. But I still have that, and I can't wait to give it a shot. So
It's a lot of fun.
I liked it when I played. I did that with another group, and we did some podcast on it. And it's a really fun system. John was there. I did that with John. I completely forgot who all was at that table. And it's really fun. But it does take the right group, and I don't think that group is particularly excited about Star Trek to begin with. But that being said, maybe we can convince John to play some Star Trek with us later on. I won't put you on the spot, John.
all he needs is another DM gig, right?
Right. But yeah, that's yeah. Anyway.
Okay, so what I was also wondering is like what how did you come up? How does this company develop the rules for the Star Trek game in particular? Do they have like a standard, like base system that they port properties into, or I know some companies work like that, or is it more like they make a unique rules for the particular universe?
So at Modifius, they like to use the 2D20 system, which has been Chris Birch's and other people's brainchild for years. And when I learned I was going to be on Star Trek, which I have to admit, it helped being right there. So I could be like, dibs, please, me. It was just one of those things where like we had to figure out how to get the right tone, because you can have a really awesome engine under the hood, but if it doesn't quite make you play Star Trek, then people aren't going to want to use it to play Star Trek.
Sure.
Like, I love D&D, love it, and I actually think it's a more versatile engine than some people say about it. But D&D would probably not be very good for Star Trek. It's a great engine, but it's not really going to capture that feel. I mean, you're going to sit there and you're going to be like, I'm Captain Kirk and I'm a level 10 paladin. And after like the novelty's worn off, it's going to be like, we got anything else in the world we want to do? Anything else that's more fun? Like, you don't want people to come in for the novelty. You want them to stay because they're actually invested and have fun. And that's just what we tried to do, which was difficult in a few ways. Because like, one, phasers, really, really hard to make rules for, especially since the show's not very consistent with its internal logic at times.
Sure.
I mean, you've seen episodes where a guy gets shot by a phaser and he's just vaporized on the spot, but then another guy gets shot in the arm and it's just a burn that he carries through the rest of the episode. And it's the same type of phaser, same power level, And how do you put that in a game? Because nobody really wants to start playing the game. They land on the planet, and then 3 of their party dies in a second.
So how did you guys tackle that? I mean, I guess don't get too far into the rules, but
I probably should talk more about myself. I've really talked about Chris Birch a lot, but he actually had a really good design philosophy that I've actually carried into like other games. Like when I worked on My Little Pony, I took that philosophy with me, and I think that's what made My Little Pony a really awesome game. And it's don't make the game that says the thing, make the game to play the thing. And basically, we're not telling people how to play a Star Trek experience. We're making a game so people can play their Star Trek experience. And they populate the world. They come up with their own adventures, and the rules help them do it. It's one reason why, like with phasers, like we talked about earlier, I know one of the weirder aspects of the system is the effects dice. But that helps determine, hey, you got hit by a phaser. What's the phaser do? Roll die. Oh, you're severely wounded, but you're not dead. Because you took a point blank blast from an energy weapon. Should kill most people, but that's not very fun and doesn't fit with the show. So
right.
We went with that.
Cool. And I mean, that's also very interesting because, I mean, if you're going with the approach of rolling on a table, that table can be adjusted and homebrewed, further leading into the idea that people are crafting their own Star Trek, universe, right?
And I love it when people tell me, it's like, hey, I came up with these rules because I thought your rules, they didn't really work. And I'm like, oh, tell me what you did, because that's really cool. The only time that someone's ever suggested a new rule to me that I was really hesitant on was putting in a point buy system, because the system wasn't designed for point buy, and that broke it really quickly. And I say that with respect to the person who came up with it. It's just when we designed it, it was really hard to get the system to move on to a point buy system, which people at home, a game where you build your character by spending points, like, instead of rolling up random stats and everything, you just boom, 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 boom. This stat costs this much. This trait costs this much. That's what point buy is.
Yeah, it's really important to get the right system together with that thematic feel. Like it's why sometimes I really appreciate a game with really simple rule structure, right? And it's why game systems like Big Eye Small Mouth were so popular. They're so versatile because they're so simple, right? um, and it kind of goes with that theory that you're talking about, where like we want the rules to support players and GMs for being able to play the type of game that they want to play. We want to support them. We don't want to tell them their story, right? And having that system's really important. So I can definitely see how that's a really important choice for them to make, to have to make when designing a game like that. With the newer game, with Below Decks, what do you think was your biggest contribution to that? So you were a co-writer, but what part of the things that you wrote do you think was like the biggest impact to the game, as it stands at release?
That's a pretty good question. With Lower Decks, I'd have to say that my biggest contribution, besides all the fiction and writing up the timeline for it, I think it was really just helping go through and making sure everyone's tone matched up. Because the thing with the book is that it's really hard for an individual writer to like see their own imprint on a book, because it's a group effort, and it should be. And making sure that everybody's tone like matches up, so that way you're not just getting like a random person walking up each chapter and telling you a completely different version of the same story. You want to make sure everybody kind of all works together, and that's really rough. Like that's rougher than a lot of people think. Like every writer has their own style, kind of like an artist. And there are some writers that I know where, I know this sounds really pedantic. This kind of sounds super nerdy for people listening at home, but sentence structure really does tell you who wrote what. Like if I can tell from reading a section where if it's like, if the sentence has no less than 30 words in it, it's this writer. If this section has a whole lot of like parentheses and em dashes in it, it's this writer. and going through and getting it all to match up in the end, it's pretty tough. But it's in the end, when you get it to work, it really works.
Okay, yeah. I mean, usually when I read an RPG book, it seems like it's written by one person, so you must be the mastermind behind that.
I wish. No, I'm pretty sure that one of my editors is going to listen to this later and be like, yeah, I've read Kennedy's stuff. It is a chore.
Yeah, I was about to say the flip side of that is the Exalted world, right? And how every different book is like the same story written from a different perspective, and there are different writers, and you can definitely tell by the tone of the books, right? How it was just completely thought of quite differently by each writer who touched it, right? It's not all, even in the court, the source book, right? It's a little fragmented, so I can see how important that is to get that tone, because it does make a big difference um, when someone has to go through and read all of it. So it
It
definitely
gets
makes
even more complicated when you have to put in mechanics because, like, so a lot of people at home probably don't realize is that some of the modern RPGs, they literally shop out their mechanics to different writers. And you'll have like the core of how a system works. But if I say, hey, Jeff, I really need 5,000 words about undersea adventures, including how not to drown and how to swim, that's your assignment for this month. And you'll be like, how in the world do I write up special rules for swimming and not dying while swimming? And that's rough, especially when I got to take Jeff's work and Wiggy's work, and I got to combine it with my work and everyone else's work, and then making sure that I've not just made a really awful salad and making something that's probably more like a chili. That analogy seems so much better in my head.
The analogy works better the hungrier you are.
So that's really interesting because I would have thought that mechanics were just like a completely different team's job. Like I had no idea that the writers were also coming up with the mechanics for a game. For me, like in my mind, and maybe this is like coming from the IT world, like there's no way like a writer would touch the coding for the back end of the whatever you're making, right? So but as a writer, you do all of it. You do the mechanics, everything.
And God forbid a programmer ever touch documentation. I
Right.
say that as a
Yeah.
programmer.
Actually, a lot of the best people in the industry who work on mechanics usually do work in IT in some form, because you really need that mind. Like, I could suggest what I think is going to be the most brilliant mechanic in the world, but you need someone who's really good at math to just sit down, play with it 1,000 times, and be like, "Hey, this stops working after this point," or "There's a memory leak," kind of like with software, but there's a memory leak and the whole engine falls apart, or even some of the dumbest things that pop up, where it's like, "Hey, your game system's great, but tell me right now, without looking anything up, how do you handle an arm wrestling contest in the game?" And you hear that and you think, oh, that's dumb. It's an arm wrestling contest. But then arm wrestling is grappling rules, it's strength rules, it's, what happens when I've got them pinned. It's weird how all that just gets so the things you don't think of. Because, I'm primarily a writer, although I do, RPG engines as well. But I'm always thinking of things like story and how this can facilitate gameplay. But you really need that person to kind of step up and be like, hey, they'll take this the wrong way, but this really sucks. So you've got to change this or the game won't be any good. And they're just as valid when they contribute that, because you need people to do that. You need the play testers and you need people who work with mechanics. I mean, we've all played games where the game just gets screwy after a certain point, first edition Exalted, which I love, but we had some pretty broken combos when we played back in high school.
Oh, for sure.
Well, we also it harkens back to the book was really hard to understand because it was so fragmented, and the rules weren't written in a way that were understandable by people, even by people who had played other RPGs. It was still difficult to understand how to get the mechanics correct in the first place. So what you have to do if you want to play that world is make up your own homebrew rules to make everything fit together, right? Which is what you don't want, I would assume, as somebody who's releasing a book, right? You want everything to work the way you've designed it to work, but I mean, you're forcing people to create homebrew rules and workarounds for something that doesn't necessarily need them. It was just explained in a really wonky way. So that's why, like, I think the work that you do is really important, because if we don't have that, it takes time away from playing to have to stop to figure something out, right?
Yeah, and like the thing which I think some people forget is that we're playing these games because they're games and to have fun. And I do agree that like a lot of RPGs should have like a point or maybe a message or maybe just like, and challenge people to think of new ideas. But then there are also days when we get off of work and it's Friday and we've decided that this Friday, rather than going to a bar or doing anything else, we're sitting down and we're playing a game. And if the book is frustrating or the book just doesn't really deliver, well, people are going to feel like, hey, I gave up my Friday for nothing. And especially as you get older and you have to like work out sitters for kids, or if you worked a double shifts, you're getting out at 6 and you're exhausted, but you really want to play. You kind of want to reward people's, enthusiasm, and you don't want to punish them by, putting in, we call them like dead mechanics, where there's some games where like you don't need certain mechanics at all because they just don't matter. And I even remember like when we played Exalted once, and yeah, I'm pulling way back to the golden oldies. I made like a warrior monk, and we were trying to take down this giant door, and I used the combat ability that the monks had, and it flopped. Like I got all the successes on my dice. And I like did like the Kamehameha charge up thing from DBZ, but I hit the wall and nothing at all. And it immediately made me think, oh, you know what? Priests suck. I don't want to play a priest in this game. Why didn't I make just a Dawn guy like, the other people did? Then I could knock down this door and not be on the other side pawing at it like a dog. Like, can I come in with my friends now? And the weirdest things you remember 20 years later.
For sure. Speaking of 20 years later, I don't know if you know this or not, but you ran the first RPG I ever played in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was working at the like everything's a dollar store across from the game shop in Washington Square Mall. And you were running Werewolf. And I don't know if I ever sat in on that. I feel like I probably didn't, but you ran shortly after a Vampire the Masquerade game.
Oh, yeah.
And I played a gargoyle for some reason. I don't know why I didn't play a vampire, but that was the first RPG I ever played, and I fell in love with it, man. It's thanks to you. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
What are you running now? Like, are you DMing anything at the moment?
I am getting ready to run a game of Aliens, which I am really excited because I love the movies. It was actually one of the movies I watched with my mom, but the book's really good, and
Really?
it really recreates the feel of the first movie. Which, spoiler alert, you're fighting a xenomorph.
Right.
Not going to go well. But no, I'm excited to run it.
Right on. So, what system is Alien built around?
I'm still like reading into the book. It's a D6 based system. It's from Free League.
Okay.
They do a lot of really good work. They also did Blade Runner and.
Did they do Mork Borg?
Yes, Mork Borg.
I've played Mork Borg. I love Mork Borg. That's one of the few games I've played besides D&D.
It's a fun game. It is a messed up game to try to explain to people.
Yeah, for sure. We eventually switched back to D&D just because the people were my party was like kind of just not doing anything besides hitting each other with or hitting enemies with weapons, So it was a little we kind of wanted a little bit more like variation in combat, if you know what I mean.
I lost my eyes in the game I played, so I did not do better than your group.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit easy on them as a DM. I probably should have been a lot rougher in Mork Borg, but I was just getting started. I wanted something rules light.
It's a lot of fun. Like for Wiggy and Jeff, I don't know, were you guys playing the game?
No. He's told us a little bit about it, but please explain it. I'm sure not many people in the audience probably have. So.
I'm just a fan, so if people say that's not what the game's about, I don't know. I played it actually like 3 times, but you're in a pretty much a fantasy world, and the land is dying. Like the bad guys are in the process of winning, and you're trying to find either the lost treasure to die happy with money in your hand or find a way out. And the space version of it's also just as messed up, where in the space version, you're on a lone ship trying to escape from planets that have been overwhelmed by just this weird cosmic disease thing. And you fight pretty fucked up people. Like in the fantasy game, we fought people where when they got taken to 0 hit points, their skeletons ripped themselves from their bodies and then started attacking you.
That's metal. I love that.
Oh yeah, like the covers are completely metal.
I started trying to listen to death metal to like get in the mindset, but I quickly gave up on that just because I haven't never really enjoyed the genre.
I stopped doing that because I really hated it.
I like to listen to one song every like 7 years just to remind myself how much I don't like it.
Honestly, that's pretty metal in and of itself.
Well, that's the first time anybody's ever called me metal or anything that I've ever done.
I only listen to one song every 7 years.
Yeah, just ever.
It makes me appreciate it that much more.
Right.
So, John, you have run a lot of games over the years, obviously, and you've written for a bunch of them. What I want to know is, do you have any advice for players to make the game better? You know, it's easy. I think it's easy to dispense advice for the DM, but like, how, in your opinion, how do you manage things like the ego of wanting to be like the main character in a story that has to be about multiple characters? And like, do you have any just general advice for players on how to be a better like player in an RPG?
I've got two, which whenever I'm at gaming conventions, I always, run a panel like how to improve your game. The two biggest things I can think of is, for starters, try not to railroad. Like, if it's a new player, new to D&D, they'll expect it. Like, they'll be like, oh, take me on this journey. Are we going to the castle? Are we saving the princess? But if you've got a group of veteran players, like, give them the pitch up front and say, hey, this campaign's set in Dragonlance. We're on Kryn. It's going to involve, the evil goddess Tiamat, and you're all, like, cool knights trying to stop her from conquering the world. But then let the players go. Like, I mean, obviously the players are going to want to like sit down and play, and they're like, cool, we're in Dragonlance. But the players might, like, anything could happen. Like, trying to control players is kind of like trying to make, take order to chaos. And I'm not saying that the players suck. It's more that the players are all like, hey, my backstory is I'm the prince from a long forgotten kingdom, and I want to restore my family's title. Which doesn't really jive with, hey, I'm a sorcerer and I want to go to this island in the middle of the ocean where secret dark power is, and I'm going to use it to conquer the world. Those two things, you can't realistically accomplish them outside of a big campaign. And the vast majority of games die, like, after a couple sessions. It's just the nature of it, where earlier when I mentioned how, gaming is an activity we've all agreed upon where we sit down to have fun. And sometimes games just peter out. It's not because they're bad. It's not because the players or the GM is bad. It's really just more of a, hey, this was fun, not really digging it. There's another game I'd like to join, or, anything else. And so try to just leave your game as open world as possible. Like Skyrim. Skyrim's, like, you've all played Skyrim, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like, do it like that, where, I am the living embodiment of the joke where the main quest is literally the last quest I will ever do in any Elder Scrolls game, in any Fallout game. In Fallout 4, I'm pretty sure spoiler for people who haven't seen Fallout or haven't played Fallout 4, when I encounter my kid later on in the game and he's the old man, I thought, oh shit, so much time's passed. No, this tracks. Because I'm not going to do the main quest if I wanted to go help the Minutemen, or hey,
right.
I know my baby got kidnapped, but come on, I'm building settlements like it's The Sims over here. And that really does apply to tabletop games because, you never know what's going to happen. And if your players say, hey, I know we've got to get to the castle to talk to the king, but there's a dungeon over there and we heard there's treasure, let them go through the dungeon. Don't be like, the Royal Guard shows up and takes you to the palace. Be like, all right, we're doing a dungeon crawl this session. That's what they want.
Right on. What do you think is the ideal length for a game? Because I know a lot of times when pretty much every time that I've started a game with my friends, my normal gaming group, we don't really have like an end goal that, in my opinion, will ever actually reach in the game. You know what I mean? And we just kind of get started and we just go on these little adventures, but they just kind of peter out because I think they don't have like a clear end goal. But what do you think is the ideal length for a game to keep players interested, and yeah.
For games, like for the session, it's about 4 to 5 hours. Like I know when we were all teens, we would play for like 12 hours at a time because that's how we rolled. But 4 to 5 hours, you've got people's attention, you've got them excited. And then when they start to get tired or bored with it, if you end there, it's great because then the players will be like, oh, then I got to come back next week to find out what happened with that dungeon. But for campaigns, oh man, that's such a tricky question because, like, I'll be honest, I've run games that have lasted for a long time, and I've also, I'm also preparing myself internally to be like, we're sitting down to play Aliens, we're all gonna love it, and then one session later, oh, they didn't really love it. Okay, try another group. But I would say, just from experience, if it's a system that's new to everyone and you're not sure if you're going to like it, 5 to 6 sessions seems like that'd be enough for everybody to get their arc. Someone told me once, plan for a number of sessions equal to your players plus 1. Because, that way, the players can get like their quests motivated and they can actually affect the plot. And that's pretty much how you can do it. But obviously, there's going to be people who are like, oh, I know a guy who's run a campaign for 30 years. They still use AD&D, and they meet apparently every other month. And the players at this point have grandchildren. And it's like, wow, you've been, like, respect. I don't think I'll ever run a 30-year campaign.
I mean, respect just for being okay with dealing with THACO for that long.
Oh my god!
Like the math. Oh, jeez. Like it's
I use
even
the chart.
but even for specialists, it takes a really long time. Oh, that sounds terrible. I mean, having a campaign go for 30 years sounds amazing. Like feel like that's everybody's dream, right? Like, just to have a continuing world that you built for 30 years, like that's so awesome.
I know if I could go back in time and keep a game going, I know there's one. Like it would be our original Exalted game with Stephen Flum was running it for us, and like I think about that game all the time. Like I don't know that I'll ever get that high from a game ever again. Like, if that could have kept going forever, I would have been fine with it.
Is that the one where people were attempting to steal TVs that didn't exist, or
yeah, Joe did do that once.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. I was just trying to map which one because we have played several different campaigns of Exalted, so I'm trying to get in my head which one was the original. But I digress. 30 years is amazing. I definitely enjoy that for sure. So for as long as we've been playing and as long as you've been working on RPGs, what's your favorite? It's a 2-part question. So one, what's your favorite system, and what's your favorite thematic games? Assuming that they're separate, but they could be the same.
That's really tough. But going with my gut instinct, because I feel this will be funnier, I think my favorite system is still the Unis system, which is used for All Flesh Must Be Eaten. Because I felt like that system, it was narrow and specific enough and yet broad enough that you could make any kind of character. And when I was in college, we played that a lot. Even our very disastrous adventure where we went to the Planet of the Apes because the Ape source book came out, and ape zombies suck. But I just really like that system. And I know that you don't really see a whole lot of games that use it anymore, but Witchcraft, which uses that system, tons of fun. Even though they never finished it, there's like books that say, "Oh, the expanded rules for this will be in our next book," and the book never comes. But
Sure.
man, theme like
Yeah,
I
I
really
mean, it doesn't have to be like a specific like genre, but like story. Like, which one has your favorite like background story history?
probably the World of Darkness, which feels like a cop out because it's so big, but
It doesn't. No, it doesn't. I mean, it encompasses a lot of different themes.
yeah, and like it's a lot of fun to it does leave the weird moments where you try to talk to people. It's like, oh, what were you doing tonight? Well, I was a were-reptile who spent his day escaping from the terrarium he found himself locked in, because if he didn't escape, werewolves were going to blow up the moon. And people just stare at you like, you gotta get off
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites too. There's a lot of fun to be had with playing with the dark side of themes, and I feel like that world does it really well without getting too. Um, yeah, I mean, you can go as far as you want to go, but most people hit a very specific comfort level, and they nail that comfort level in the book and the themes really well. Um, Being a social game, it lets you see kind of like the dark humor that people have, but at the same time, not going too far, right? And it's a really hard balance to hit, and I feel like they do that really well.
Plus,
That would be my side.
from like, and I'm just gonna be blunt here, from a pure power fantasy perspective, what is cooler than actually getting to play as the katana wielding vampire assassin? I know we've all made fun of that archetype, just because it seems so cheesy, like films like Underworld, but you actually get to sit down and mow down like a wave of werewolves, or take on a SWAT team and win. And there's a little bit of a power fantasy going on where it's like, I'm a total badass, and this game lets me be a total badass.
I mean, I'll admit it. Underworld series is probably one of my favorites. But I really do like cheese. I really like cheese in my movies. And Jeff also knows that I really enjoy bad movies when they're really bad. That's one of my favorite things. I mean, you may know this too, but I really enjoy movies that are bad. Like what was that Time movie that's really bad, Jeff? What was that called?
I'm not sure.
It's Time something like
Time Bandits?
Yeah, Time Bandits.
Oh, I love
Oh, Time
Time
Bandits is
Bandits.
just a classic, man.
It's so bad though that it's so fantastic, right? Like, oh, but yeah, Underworld's got all that cheese, and I really like that. I really like that, and I like that feeling that you were kind of talking about, just being able to be powerful, and it's okay to be powerful, and it's expected, right?
Well, games actually, like, they can help people deal with complex issues. I remember when RPGs were just this super, super nerdy hobby to explain to people, where people were just assume the worst about you if you said, "Oh, I play in a D&D group. We meet every Friday," and they thought of like pocket protectors, thick glasses, no social skills. Which, by and large, the majority of gamers are definitely like, they're very socially conscious. They're very chill people. But role playing games are now actually seeing a lot of use in prisons and in therapy clinics, because they allow people to not be you for a second. And as someone who's like talked to like actual therapists about gaming, the reason why RPGs are important to people trying to cope with a serious issue is because we all have had days, and this is me explaining what they told me. We've all had days where we didn't want to be us, where you get up in the morning and, like, if I know I have to go to work and it's really early, I don't want to be Kennedy. I want to be someone else who doesn't have to go to work in the morning. But then there are people who deal with complex issues like PTSD or abuse, other things, severe depression. And role playing games literally allow you to sit down and be like, hey, I'm not John Kennedy. I'm going to play, like Jason, Paladin of Palor, and I'm here to stop the Dark Lord. And it's such a simple notion. Like, you just think about it like, oh, you don't want to be you for a while. But it actually lets people sit down and become empowered, because then you're no longer, guy paying off his car loan or worried about, is he going to make rent this month? You're a hero with cool powers who has the respects of fictional people, but it just allows you to work through things. And I've seen players where they're able to just sit down and to challenge the things that they couldn't challenge before. And the same friend, she's been taking it to prisons where you've probably all seen articles about inmates play D&D. And obviously, prison's a serious place. It should be, a luxury resort. If you're in prison, you likely committed a crime. That means you should be there. But I've always been a big advocate that prisons should be about rehabilitating people, not just incarcerating them until the day we let them go. And role-playing games, they let people work through their past trauma. They let them feel valued where maybe they didn't feel valued before. So they're able to sit down and, yeah, I know I just joked about, cars and everything else, but there could be a guy out there right now in prison during his 1 hour of yard time, and he's choosing to spend it in the library with his friends playing D&D, and he's realizing that he can be a hero. He doesn't have to be the villain. And I think that's kind of like the magical thing about RPGs, because we're now seeing this unexpected and really powerful bonus that I know I've probably used throughout my life and a bunch of other gamers. But now we're seeing a lot of people being able to sit down and be like, hey, gaming is actually changing my life for the better. Instead of the usual thing where we always talk about, like, gaming is like what you do when you're bored, or say goodbye to your checking account. Which, as I say this, I'm surrounded by probably like $1,000 worth of gaming shit as is. But I just think that's so wonderful. And I really like that we have people, professional therapists with years of education behind them, now looking at role-playing games saying, hey, there's something to that.
There's an article that actually just came out. I'm trying to remember when it actually came out. I think it was the very end of August, where they brought D&D to um, a prison in Texas with inmates that are facing death row,
Mm-hmm.
and it literally, I mean, they obviously did some things that have given them a sentence on death row. But it did kind of give them a new, like, something to be excited about for life. Um, and regardless of whether or not you agree with those stipulations or not, I think it's important for people. I mean, even if you've done something like that, there's still people, right? And it's torture not to be able to disassociate every once in a while, and to be able to give people that ability is something that just seems amazing to me. um as far as, and to know that that's how far this is spread. Like, this is death row. Like, this is like the people who have done the worst crimes,
Yeah.
but they're still people. They still have feelings. They still are human beings, and I can't imagine that that's anything less than the most stress you could possibly be under. And, like, so what, are we gonna kill him twice? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
No, I absolutely agree. And also, and it happens, what if evidence is found later that exonerates some of their crime? And then they're no longer on death row. And I'm not saying, obviously, that every person on death row is secretly innocent. I do believe that there are some cases where, if the evidence is strong enough, then they did it. But yeah, we shouldn't really be torturing people. And I would much prefer it if by the time we executed, like the world's worst killer, that hopefully by the end we've rehabilitated him. Because otherwise it just feels like we took a really long time to execute a guy and wasted so much money and time and resources on him and tortured him at the same time, when we could have just, like, not.
Right.
Just
Right.
not done that thing. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, it's just gonna sound weird. I've never done time, but I did spend a month in the ICU. And circling back
Same.
to
That's the same thing. That's the same thing.
yeah, I nearly died once, which I know we're going to circle back to.
Sure.
I perforated my small intestine while at Gen Con, and I didn't know it, but I had necrotic tumors inside of me, which were literally eating me. And I survived, obviously, or otherwise your ghost catching software is really good. But it really sucked because I went from Gen Con, which was a lot of fun. We debuted Star Trek. We were, all this cool stuff. I thought I had a stomach bug towards the end, and no, I was hemorrhaging a lot of blood, and it sucked. And the reason why I was in the ICU for a month is my immune system had essentially collapsed because I was fighting something called sepsis, and they couldn't let me go because if they did, any germ in the world would have murdered me. And I was hooked up to all these, tubes and everything, all this equipment. Couldn't leave the bed without setting off the equipment or without having to have a nurse come through and disconnect me. And I had, a TV in my room. So, it wasn't as bad as prison. And none of my experience should be considered as bad as prison. But I was also not able to go anywhere. And it was just the messed up part about this is like when you have sepsis, they try all these things where they're like, make them really happy. We've proven through science that being happy will help you beat sepsis. Don't ask me for proof of this. This could literally be a big lie that I was told, and now I'm telling you the lie. But that's basically what happened. And now being stuck in a room watching really bad, I was watching Comedy Central, which I haven't watched in a long time. And I just remember sitting there getting really mad that I was watching The Sorcerer's Apprentice. But apparently movies that are shown on cable now, it's 5 minutes on, 5 minutes of commercials.
Right.
So I would nod off and like fall asleep because of the pain meds. I would wake up and I would think, oh no, I've missed so much of the movie and only like 30 minutes has gone by. But that's, just being stuck in a room, where it was kind of torture because all I wanted to do was to go out and do anything in the world. And they could have let me have, I had my cell phone, but limited to what I could do there. But I wasn't allowed to like touch surfaces because there could be germs there. And everybody who came in, you had to wear like a mask, and the nurses were all in like their full getup. This was think COVID wear before there was COVID.
Right.
And so it was just harsh. Like my only visitors were people who had to scrub up before they walked in the room. And also internally, I'm counting all the money that I'm just spending by the second of existing in that room. And so I can't imagine being put in a small room, having none of the creature comforts. I mean, and just trying to wait out a 4-year sentence because, I don't know, possession of marijuana or too many parking tickets. Obviously, if it's somebody that's like, oh no, that's a murderer, he killed a kid. Yeah, bad person, deserves to be punished. But I can't imagine that for other criminals.
Well, speaking of the exact opposite of escapism in RPGs, I have to ask you, since your name is John, have you played the RPG Everyone is John?
No.
Have you heard of it?
No, what is this?
Okay, it's a game that you generally play for only one session, and all of the characters except for the DM control different voices in the head of an insane man in Minneapolis named John. And each time John attempts a simple task, even like walking, that requires a dice roll. And if John passes out or falls asleep, the other voices start vying for control.
I really like this because I have seen Being John Malkovich, so I would just love it to play this game, even though it would probably just be really, really weird. And if you were inside my head, you would probably have to get used to like random songs playing just all the time.
I was about to say, is this hitting too close to home, John? Is this something you deal with on a daily basis already?
Well, he's not from Minneapolis, so you're good there.
Yeah, but he's
I
from
have ADD, so good luck.
right. He is from Annapolis.
That's true.
So
One
it's
of them.
close enough. So it's close enough. Right.
Annapolis, but not Annapolis.
Right.
Yeah,
To
correct.
be clear.
No, that suggests a much cooler job, like Marine or something.
Right. So, John, I want to ask you some questions that are a little. They're about RPGs, but they're also a little bit a topic that we touch on pretty frequently. We're curious about what your opinions are with AI in the RPG world.
And if you don't mind starting with Chat GPT, since you're a writer, I feel like that's a little bit more relevant.
I always like talking about my competition. I'm just going to give you the 100% just real hot take here. And I hope I don't alienate any of my colleagues who listen to this. The genie is out of the bottle. We can't uninvent AI. I don't like how it was invented. I don't like the fact that, it was trained on stolen work. That sucks. And they could just start over. They could just make a more voluntary based AI model. They could do that, but they're not. And not to sound defeatist, it's just at some point we're going to have to accept that we live in a world where I can type a couple of phrases into a prompt and it'll give me a piece of artwork or a story. And this was always going to happen. I mean, we can't just say that AI was going to pop out and it'll be, Data from Star Trek. And I'm not saying that if your work's been stolen that you have to shut up and get used to it. I mean, obviously try to fight it through any means you've got.
Sure.
The thing that we have to acknowledge, though, is that it's not going away. And I don't use it because I don't need to use it. I've worked in this industry so long, I think my record speaks for itself. I think that there's ethical uses for AI where if you are making a gaming book and you don't know what the image is in your brain and you play around with Midjourney, boom, that gives you the basis of it. And then go to your artist and say, this, but yours, but add these things I want to see in it. But don't just, there's a woman who on Twitter was talking about how she spends $150 for Midjourney, Chat GPT, and a bunch of other stuff. But then she makes $300 in passive income from her Amazon store. And she makes really awful romance novels. Because, she just gives it a prompt and it's like, couple meets on a boat. The boat gets shipwrecked. Tell me this story. And she uses an editing AI to edit it. And she makes these books. And the reviews are bad. The books, apparently some of them change tone halfway through. One of the books, the main character dies 30 pages in, and then it's all people talking about his funeral, apparently.
Hell yeah.
I would read that, though.
I think that just for the time being, until some kind of oversight can step in, and this is going to suck, and I know this is painful for me to say, as it probably is for writers out there to hear, we've really just got to stay the course and be like, hey, quality's going to win out.
Right.
And again, if your work's been stolen by one of these engines, you don't have to just sit down and shut up, be vocal. The Writers Guild, they may have won the strike. We'll see. It's going to depend the next couple of days. And it was regarding AI, which,
right.
Even companies that I've worked with and, they've talked about how they've got departments higher up that are looking into AI because it's the technology that's out right now. It would be like if we're, early 2000s and I said, no, Jeff, we're not doing Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a fad. Who the hell would use Wi-Fi when you can plug in your computer to the internet? And
right.
And that's basically my thoughts on it.
I have a thought around this, and I think you're right when I don't necessarily. I think in the short term, quality wins, right? I agree with that wholeheartedly. But I also see a scenario because the entire point of AI is for AI to learn what's better, right? So eventually we get to a point where it decides, just as a loose example, that it decides that the sitcom, the architecture of a sitcom is what is perfect, right? Sitcoms dominated TV for a really long time,
Sure.
right? But it takes something different to really capture the heart of a person. And those types of ideas, like the AI is going to get to the point where it thinks sitcoms are the end all be all because that's what it everybody keeps leaning it towards when it keeps learning, right? And then John's going to come out with South Park
Right.
because
Well,
he's not paying attention, because he's not using AI, he's using his own, like there's something special about the human creativity spark that
yeah, and the best
really
sitcoms are the
doesn't
ones
with
that
AI.
subverted it. I mean, it subverted it at least in some way, right? Even if they're just traditional sitcoms, still they still like introduce some new element that wasn't there before. So if you have an AI just looking at past sitcoms, they're just going to regurgitate that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I agree with you, John. I do think quality right now quality means a lot because the tech's bad, right? But the tech is going to learn, it is going to get better. But I think the tech's going to pigeonhole itself, um, which is why I think modular AI is really what like companies are really looking at right now, is like how can I use AI for the specific use case and get the best result right over time. um, I'd be really eh, I don't see AI getting that human creativity spark that you have and that you're able to employ, right? I mean, time will tell. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I would say
I don't know if you do, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
We're also seeing a lot of people getting bored with AI. I mean,
right.
AI is capable of doing a lot of really great things, but right now you're seeing artwork that gets shared to groups, and it's like, look, it's the cast of Seinfeld, but they're on the Starship Enterprise. And a lot of the comments now are like, it's AI, I'm bored with this, I don't want to see this anymore. Because it was novel, and it still has a lot of uses, like, obviously. But there's still just a lot of people who are like, yeah, I don't want to read AI stuff. If I'm paying you $20, give me something that a person made, not that a machine regurgitated.
Yeah, and I see I can see a use with writing, and you can tell me whether or not you think this is off or not. But I see it to be able. uh, I like it because if I don't have a specific like premise, right? Like it'll give me a premise and then everything after that's my own creation, right? Like I think if you use it as the tool that it's meant to be used at and it can be used at effectively, I think that it can supplement
Well,
really
what
well.
one thing I think it actually might be pretty good at is what we talked about earlier, which is taking 20 different human writers' work and turning it into one unified style. I think it can understand meaning pretty well. So I think it could be used uh, to communicate um, meaning in like a unified way. Now, I don't know that what we have today would be very good at, like, it wouldn't make a funny product like the Star Trek game you worked on, for instance.
Mm-hmm. It's, yeah, and I think that's actually a really good use because I guess in a roundabout way, if it's used in an advisory capacity, I'm definitely okay with it because then it becomes a tool like Photoshop and Wordly and all these things which we created to enhance art. But using it to replace it completely, and for people at home, if you're wondering why that's a big deal, as someone who struggled to convince people of the validity of what I do, and a lot of other people who do it, like I was at Gen Con and people would walk up to artists and they would just flat out insult them. And they would say, I'm not paying $50 for that gorgeous watercolor you did. And it's like, but it took me over like 50 hours to paint. They're like, screw that. I don't want that. That's crap. You should get a real job. And it's just incredible how we live in a culture where we desperately need art, film, movies, anime, all this. And yet some people have a chip on their shoulders and they don't like how it's made. They think that all of us should, be out there, and even like And day jobs are important to artists too, obviously. But it just seems like a lot of people don't understand that, like, just with how, like, the donuts get made, this is how your books get made. This is how all this. And I know that we've talked about how AI can be really, really good for like enhancing it and doing all of this. The powers that be really are more interested in using it to take over the process. And then you don't need a writer's room to make jokes. You have an intern with a list of prompts created by the executives, typing it into a computer and picking out the best bits.
Right. Yeah, that does seem to be what it is now. Like, I mean, that's one big thing the writer's strike was, fighting against, is the idea that they would have to edit AI scripts. It's almost like it's better to write it from scratch. I'm sure it is today, at least.
And I'm not saying that, like, AI is not going to generate, like, the next great thing. I mean, drawing upon a million books, using advanced algorithms to determine what people like. I mean, we have that now. I mean, Google Ads, which is in pretty much every site and software that you use, it studies what you buy. It studies what you look at. I mean, I learned recently that Facebook's algorithm actually tracks how long you spend looking at a picture or an ad. And even if it's only for like 3 or 4 seconds, it immediately goes, oh, you want to see more of this ad. And it just starts that pain thing throughout everything. And the perils of the 21st century, I guess the only thing that I can really say about that is at least we don't live in an era with the Black Death. Not to make light of it, but hey, if you add, do I want to live 100 years ago or now? And the answer is going to be now, because as cool as it would be to go back to, like, before the Great War and seeing how American society develops, I kind of like the internet. I kind of like air conditioning.
Well, there's still time. There's still time for the Black Death to make a comeback. Before you know it, people will be, making YouTube videos about doing your own research on the plague.
I learned in a very dumb way. The Black Death is still around today. We just have antibiotics. So it's called tularemia. And I know that because I got bitten by a chipmunk once, and that was the dumbest thing that's ever happened to me. It just was. No, like, for real. I get a chipmunk got stuck in my bird feeder. I'm trying to shake it out. On the way out, it like ninja flips onto my hand, gives me the tiniest little scratch. And next thing I know, I have several of my friends who are doctors, because I posted about it on Facebook, and they're like, haha, funny joke, get your ass to the ER right now. I'm like, but it's tiny scratch. We're all laughing because it's funny. Get your ass to the ER right now. And then I have 3 doctors outside of my room arguing with each other. It was almost like a Three Stooges bit. And at one point, one of them leans his head in and goes, hey, dude, are you tell the truth? Like, if you want a cool story, we'll back you up. Were you really bitten by a chipmunk? And I'm holding this centimeter-long scratch on my knuckle going, it's real. I was bitten by a chipmunk. And then I hear the doctors outside going, well, what do we do? What's the protocol? Rabies shot and tularemia vaccine. Oh, that's going to fuck up his whole weekend. And you know what, audience? It really did.
I'm glad that that's what they were worried about, right? Like, you're trying to get what is potentially, like, life-saving care. And they're like, yeah, but it's going to fuck up this dude's weekend. He's not going to be able to go out.
They were also looking at it like, that's a tiny scratch. Are you sure a chipmunk bit you? And I'm just staring at them like, his mouth touched me, man. I don't know what to tell you. I don't even think I should be here. It broke the skin barely.
So John, you have multiple things coming out at the moment, things you've worked on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work that's been released, so that we can give some people some direction on where they can go to check that stuff out.
If you want to check out my Renegade stuff, go to just Google Renegade Game Studios. I was the junior dev on My Little Pony, and I've worked on Power Rangers, and actually the newest property with Renegade that I'm working on. And I didn't work on the core book, but I'm working on the next book, which I can't say because we haven't announced it yet. But I'm working on Werewolf 5th edition.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I'm
That's got to be
excited for
really
that.
exciting for you. I know that werewolf means a lot to you.
It is. It's interesting because it's kind of a reboot. They've changed some things about Werewolf for 5th edition, like they did with Vampire and Hunter. But getting to see behind the scenes, I'm pretty excited for what's coming next. And yeah, and also, like you said, it's Werewolf was one of the first long chronicles I ever ran. And yeah, I still own, like, I don't own that many role playing books anymore because, I got older and I didn't really want to, like, keep them around as much. But I still have all my Werewolf the Apocalypse books.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I imagine you do. I mean, I've kept a couple around that I don't play anymore, just to have them, just in case that day comes again, right? So I definitely
I've got
like to
a copy of Exalted Sidereals that has been in my car for multiple cars.
Just on that moment when someone calls you for an Exalted game.
You never know. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else? Anywhere else we can plug your stuff, your socials, anything like that?
You could find me on the rapidly shrinking Twitter as JK Myth. Also, I've been around on a Blue Sky as Triceratops. The name I wanted was taken already, and so I just went with my favorite dinosaur, and I stand by that choice. And then
Hell yeah.
yeah. And then you can find me on Facebook as JD Kennedy, and I will just be the account that's got the probably a cartoon avatar where my face should be.
Awesome.
Can I put you on the spot real quick, John?
Sure.
Okay, so we had talked briefly a while back about trying to get our past guests together for a one-shot game. Would you be interested in being either a DM or a player on a one-shot game with us?
Oh, I'd love it. I'm down.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, we want to get guests together and do a little funsies.
Yeah, I feel like getting all of us together with Bianca and Jackie would be a really fun little one-shot game.
I bet.
Yeah, that could be really great for sure. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for us, guys. Thanks so much for listening to this episode, and make sure to check out John's work and his socials, and we will see you guys later.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.